Good evening. This will be a fun meeting. I guess we should do roll calls. Is this being taped, Jonathan? Or? Okay. Lisa, do you want to start at your end?
Commissioner Forssell, present.
Schwartz, present.
Danaher, present.
Siegel, present.
Johnston, present.
Trumbull, present.
We do have a couple of speakers here. David Carnahan's going to talk to us about recruiting for city positions.
Thank you, Chair Danaher and Commissioners. David Carnahan in the City Clerk's office. As you know, if you see me here in the evening for your meeting, we're recruiting for something. We're currently recruiting for the Architectural Review Board, the Historic Resources Board, and the Planning and Transportation Commission. So a big ask we have of you is reaching out to the community to at least 2 people for one of these positions. We're looking to fill 2 positions on the Architectural Review Board, 4 on the Historic Resources Board, and 2 on the Planning and Transportation Commission. As you know, this is a great way to learn more about the community, to give back to the community, and to help continue making Palo Alto the great community that it is. I'm going to give each of you a flyer to take as a reminder to reach out to someone. The application deadline is next week on September 19th at 4:30 p.m. Thank you.
Jeff.
Okay, so as you know, the joint meeting with council didn't happen on August 21st as scheduled. Too bad. So I got to thinking about this, and remember how when there was a drought in California?
Oh, we do have a new date now. Were you aware? We do have a date scheduled now, I believe.
Oh, I don't know what it is.
Oh, it's October 10th.
Okay. Well, let me just say this anyway. As with the drought, when you're scheduled every month, just in case you needed to talk about it, until this really happens, why don't you just agendize it every month? And then if it doesn't happen, you can talk about it. Second point, utilities quarter reports. In the old days, UAC used to schedule those whenever they happened, so that just in case you wanted to talk about them, you could. I think that would probably be a good idea. The fiber fund, I'm kind of curious to know what's in it right now, because on August 21st, when council talked about it, everyone thought there was $28 million in it. And since the previous quarter was more like 22.5 million, that would surprise me if it increased that much in a quarter. So, especially if it has, maybe you could agendize it to find out why that happened. And then dark fiber financials. In April of 2013, staff gave something that reported the predicted financials through 2018. Commissioner John, sorry, not going to remember his name, John Melton, asked for this in March, and staff brought it to him in April, which I thought was really good response. But we haven't had such a projection since, and it would be great to get one, say, through 2023 or something like that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Next topic is approval of the minutes. Were there any comments on the meeting minutes from last? Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? I think that was unanimous. Right? Lisa, with your permission, we'll record that as approved, but you can revisit it later in the meeting if you see something. Any comments on the agenda tonight? Is this okay? Okay, none. Reports from commissioner meetings or events. Okay.
So she cleverly hid, which means I can't use my usual sarcastic jokes about a friend. So instead, I would like to warmly praise our beloved communication director, Catherine Cox-Elvert. The Tuolumne River Trust is named her one of their 2 champions that they are celebrating on this Saturday at 5:30 at the Garden Court Hotel.
Oh.
So it's very significant praise from that organization.
Wonderful, thanks for mentioning that. Anything else? All right. Director of Utilities report.
Good evening, Chair Danaher and Commissioners. I'm Dean Batchelor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. As most of you know, that Ed Shikata, General Manager, is not going to be here tonight, so you're going to get stuck with me. So I do have a little bit of a report out here. So today in Utilities, we hosted the 2nd community workshop to provide information on our strategic plan efforts. And we gathered some public input, so we had a combination of some staff members as well as community folks and some businesses that were there. Again, this was the 2nd one that we've had. The last one was about a month ago on August the 4th. We were invited community members to join us and share their perspectives and the key trends, the priorities, and the actions considered, and tried to align the strategic plan with the community and other stakeholder goals. The workshop, as everybody is aware now, is scheduled on October the 4th from 6 to 8 at the Palo Alto Arts Center, which is at 1313 Mill Street in Palo Alto. There'll be some light and refreshments. We've asked people to RSVP to the Utility Strategy Plan, brownpaperticket.com. And if there's questions, again, back to the Utility Strategic Plan, the cityofpaloalto.org. Along with that, so we'll do this real quick here.
You want me to? Here.
You got it. Thanks. You can pass that flyer out real quick for me. Thank you. So, Jonathan's going to pass out the flyer. I know that, you know, we've been talking about is kind of what the UAC's role is going to be, and we'll kind of define that a little bit more. But more importantly is that, you know, you can kind of be stewards for us to get the word out. We have put this flyer out on Nextdoor, on our Facebook, on our Twitter, our Palo Alto Neighborhoods Association's key account emails at the servers that we have. The Chamber of Commerce downtown has it. News items at our homepage. And we also have it on our Palo Alto city's website as well, this flyer as you see. So again, October the 4th, so it's open for the community to come in. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the strategic plan and give you an update on that. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what we might see about what we're thinking about, what your roles might be at that period of time. Yes, Judith?
Were we invited to the other ones? I don't seem to recall knowing about
No, the other ones, again, were for residentials and community members. We really wanted business stakeholders, and we had 2 meetings with those folks from the businesses. So we had.
And so for this one, do we have Brown Act problems with if more than 3 of us come?
No, not at all. Because again, it's just as a community. We checked with Molly. I checked with Molly again about that whole thing, but there's not going to be a Brown Act issue with that. And like I said, we'll talk a little more about, we'll get a little more details in that.
So Dean, let me interrupt. Yep. You know, just wearing my old city attorney hat, you know, as long as it's announced as a meeting of us, there can't be a Brown Act problem. But my serious question is, who do you want to RSVP? Do you want the Utilities Commissioner or me to tell you that my energy policy class is coming, which is 32 San Jose State students?
I think the thing is that I think you could just RSVP yourself and let us know how many bodies would be coming then at that period of time, so we'll get a kind of a head count. You know, we opened it up. We're going to be, like I say, at the Palo Alto Arts Center. It's a pretty large room. We're thinking that, if we can get 100 folks there from the community, we're going to be quite happy with that, and get feedback from those members. So,
this is replacing our next monthly meeting.
yes,
Can you tell us what the format is? I mean, who's going to be presenting, and how do you see that?
So I'll go back into that. So
okay.
the first thing on the agenda item is to talk about strategic plan. So we'll give an update really about that, and then we'll talk a little bit about that format on the 4th. So carbon neutral output, this month we ramped up our outreach about our carbon neutral gas and electric utilities, while carbon neutral for gas is new. We've discovered that many community members are aware that the city's electric supply has been carbon neutral since 2013, and Palo Alto is the first city in the nation to have completely carbon neutral electric and a gas portfolio. Starting this month, residents and businesses will begin seeing a line item charge of 4 cents per therm on their utility bills for carbon neutral gas. As a part of the communication with the public, we are unveiling new web pages, bill inserts, and videos to explain what it means to be carbon neutral, and continue to be important in being energy efficient. Carbon neutral for energy portfolio is another step on the path of sustainability, and helps the city advance towards the goals of achieving the 80% by 2030. So that's going to be coming out this month on the 4 cents on per therm increase. Bay Area sunshades. Yep. Oh, sure.
I'd highly encourage going and watching the video. This was a real attempt by, by our entire communications team to really make an effort to explain what carbon neutrality means and what the city's long-term sustainability plans are, to the extent they're already laid out. So,
Any chance you could email the UAC a link to the video?
Yes.
absolutely.
And send it to some of the school teachers or principals in the city too.
Okay, so as we mentioned last month, the city's preparing in the Bay Area Sunshade Program, which opened August the 7th. Sunshades allows residents or employees of businesses in the Bay Area, Yolo County, and Sacramento counties to receive discounts on solar photovoltaic systems, zero emissions on electric vehicle charging stations, and then folks that want to participate in that program need to register by November the 10th. Again, there's details on our website at cityofpalo.org/forward sunshades. So the sunshade program needs to register by November the 10th. Shares. Oh, shares. Some of the upcoming events and some of the workshops that are going on, Tuesday, September the 12th, an intro to zero net energy and beyond design tools and strengthen strategic training for single family residents and buildings. Then on Sunday, September the 17th, there's going to be National Drive Electric Week is September the 9th through the 17th. They'll be taking place across the U.S. and other countries. On Sunday the 17th, it's a ride and drive event. It will take place at Acra, which is here in Palo Alto from 1 to 4. Some of the vehicles that will be there will be the BMW i3, the Chevy Volt, the Bolt, the Fiat 500, the Focus EV, the Honda Clarity, and the Soul, and the Leaf, and the Tesla S, and the VW G Golf. So it's a ride and drive event for the community to come out. They're located at 3921 East Bay Shore and in Elwell Court. So it's down on East Bay Shore. And that's going to happen on Sunday the 17th. So the idea is that, these manufacturers will all come out. They'll hold some workshops. They'll talk a little bit about some of the advantages of having an EV. Does it make sense to buy? Does it make sense to lease? And then It'll answer some questions about folks that might have some anxiety around, is our battery going to be long enough for traveling? Where some of the EV spots are in Palo Alto. So it should bring up quite a few host of folks out to look at this. And then on September 23rd, September 23rd, the Bay Area Sunshades Workshop is going to happen at that period of time. September 30th, maintain natural gardens and leak detections. And then again on October the 4th, as you saw in the flyers, our big workshop. And the last thing is September 4th, design native gardens and rainwater harvesting will be on November the 4th, on the Saturday. So with that, that is the general manager's report.
All right, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Any commissioner comments? All right.
Just you scheduled one of the events on September 30th, did you say?
Yes, September 30th.
That's Yom Kippur.
I'm sorry?
That's Yom Kippur. It's a very important Jewish holiday, so just to let you know.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
So this particular workshop, fortunately, we've scheduled 2 of them. So one on the 30th and one on November 4th. So hopefully we should be able to get a wide range of participation, but thank you for the heads up on that.
All right, on to new business, utility strategic plan.
So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tony George from NewGen. We're going to talk a little bit about where we are. Yeah, you would rather stand. And we'll go ahead and we'll talk a little bit about today's meeting that we hosted, as well as some updates, and then again, we'll get into some of the roles on the 4th.
Hello, my name is Tony Georges. I was here the first time around to introduce you to the strategic plan, and we're here to give you a second update on the progress that we've made to date. And then at the end, I think to the point of the October 4th workshop, hopefully get some feedback on what role the UAC members could play and the council members could play. So getting started, just want to give you a brief overview. We're just going to briefly reground ourselves in the overall process, where we're at in that process, the progress that we've made. Look at our draft strategic direction. This is kind of the first step in the strategic plan, really guiding us, planting a flag 10 to 12 years down the road, seeing where we're trying to go. We will then dive into some of the priorities that have been developed, draft priorities that have come from that. We'll get some feedback from the stakeholder process. I'll give you a list and a rundown of the different stakeholder meetings and engagement we've accomplished to date and what remains. Give you some summary level information on and feedback of what they've provided and how we've included that in our process. And then finally, those next steps in regards to the October 4th meeting. So just quickly reviewing the process, really 3 large phases: a kickoff phase, which is completed. The workshops, we're about halfway through. We have 4 core planning team workshops. That's the internal group within utilities of about 25, 26 members, I believe, really driving the development of the overall strategic plan. Like I said, we're about halfway through that. And then the third phase being basically the reports, presentations of the draft and final strategic plan. Happening late this year. I think the target for full adoption by council is in January and February timeframe. Just a quick touch on the structure, as we're going to touch on the first 2 elements here in this message map. The strategic direction, we do have a draft strategic direction that we want to get your feedback on. From that strategic direction, we do then develop priorities. These are the key issues, challenges the utility is going to face and must address in order to achieve the strategic direction. So we'll be touching on both those today. Those are the more long-term, higher-level elements of the plan. As we transition into the 3rd and 4th workshops, we'll be getting into the strategies and actual actions, the more tactical elements of the plan, and that will be a large component of that community workshop as well on October 4th. In regards to progress of the core planning team, really wanted to point out just the strategic direction, the SWOT analysis that we completed, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that led into the identification of the 4 initial priorities that the utility must address to achieve the direction. As I mentioned, we'll be transitioning into the more tactical, detailed elements of the plan coming up starting on the 20th of September and then again in October for the final meeting. The bottom section here of the slide is, I did want to touch on the number of stakeholder meetings that we have held, external and internal to the city. We do have a utility stakeholder group. That is a group that is of key accounts, more business customers, commercial customers are involved in that group, some community representatives as well. We have had 2 meetings with them on the 4th of August, and then we just completed one this morning, the second of the 2. I've got some feedback and some slides coming up. We had a city leadership meeting on the 22nd of August. That was really to identify some collaborative opportunities within the city, maybe leverage and build on some successes that the utility has had with other departments, and how can we move forward with the strategic plan and opting the city in. Broader staff and employee meetings, we've had a substantial amount of internal engagement with the workforce. To kick off the entire project, there were, I believe, 9 smaller group meetings that were held by Blue Point Planning. Mindy led that effort, and we've integrated that. We do have 2 meetings tomorrow. They're larger group meetings with staff, with the utility, to roll out similar information you're going to see today to get their feedback. And then finally, obviously, the community meeting on the 4th of October. So in looking at the strategic direction, this is a similar diagram that we've talked about with the UAC, and we talked about with the utility stakeholder group and others in the city. And we've gotten their feedback, and you'll see that here in a moment. But the really strategic direction of the utility is really based on the passion for what is Palo Alto Utilities passionate about, what can we be the best at, the understanding, and what is the economic engine that's really driving the utility in the community. One thing I did want to point out, the strategic direction is more of a 10, 12-year time frame, planting that flag where we want to be. The overall mission of the utility obviously does not change. That remains the same, and I want to point out that our strategic direction is aligned with that, providing safe, reliable, environmentally sustainable, and cost-effective services.
Notice your economic engine is staying ahead of the tech curve. It hasn't been modus operandi. It may not be the best.
The other thing I just want to ask, as one of the older commissioners, having teeny tiny type with a no contrast background is really hard to read, either on the slide or in the printout. So if you could keep in mind that some of us actually, we need a little bigger type. Thank you.
Need more legible, understood and agreed.
Thank you.
This is just capturing some of the initial feedback that we had received from the prior meeting. So this is the draft strategic direction. We have solicited feedback, like I said, from the utility stakeholder group, from the city as well, and internally it's been engaged with employees, and will be again tomorrow. But at CPAU, our people empower tomorrow's ambitions while caring for today's needs. And to unpack that a little bit, to provide a little bit more detail around that, what does that really look like? What does empowering tomorrow's ambitions and caring for today's needs look like? Building community resilience, engaging citizens in our collective safety and sustainability. Earning public trust. We earn public trust in our use of natural, financial, and human resources. And we build on the legacy of Palo Alto's uniquely integrated utilities through our professionalism and stewardship for the future. So this is our planting our flag 10 years, 12 years in the future, what we're striving to accomplish, and then we'll get into the elements, or some of the feedback that we received from this so far. But I would want to get your initial thoughts on this, and are there any concerns, any gaps that you see, at least initially, any words in there that may cause pause, concern for yourself or in the community?
I'm wondering how that interplays with the mission. So, I don't know, is that pyramid or some visual?
Relationship as far as how the strategic direction supports, or at least aligns? Well, the first thing I've said, obviously the lines, especially around sustainability. There are other elements in here about caring for today's needs, kind of has a broad context, or can have a broad context, that cost-effective element, balancing, striving for, innovation and sustainability, but balancing that with the needs of the community and remaining cost competitive, and looking at the unintended consequences, but I think one of the comments that we had received previously. So this should be supportive in the broader context of a strategic plan. The strategic direction should be supportive of and align with the mission. And I think in this case, I would argue that it does, but it certainly has much more depth to it than the mission, which is pretty clear and concise. Any initial questions or concerns?
I think it's well written. It's
nice way of phrasing why all of us are proud to be associated with the utility department in our own little ways.
Great. Well, I'll step into some of the comments that we've received. So this is the utility stakeholder group. So as I mentioned, we have shown this to several groups and received their feedback to ensure, same type of process, ensure there's not anything we're really missing, there's any blind spots for us, make sure there's not something that may be a trigger for folks. But in the first meeting with the utility stakeholder group, we focused on market trends. You'll probably see a lot of alignment here with some of the items we discussed in our first meeting with the UAC. Obviously, electrification came up, was an item came up. Facilitating customer choice and options, more of a partnering of the customer from the utility standpoint, helping them navigate the different options. I think aligned with some of the feedback we'd received. Strategic use of data. I think smart grid, AMI, automated metering infrastructure is kind of top of mind for a lot of folks in the utility industry, and I think in the community, seeing what we can do with that information and that data going forward. And again, balancing those aspirational goals with the impacts to the community and affordability. So it was good to see, and I somewhat would expect that, obviously, from the business community, the commercial side, saying, it's great to have these goals, but we need to keep in mind, keep the finances in shape and make sure we're providing cost competitive and we are competitive in the market. Resiliency, another one that I think aligned with some of the UAC feedback. The second meeting that we actually just completed, the feedback we got this morning on the strategic direction was really emphasizing, CPO's Palo Alto Utilities leadership position, kind of being a model for others in the utility space. I think from their standpoint and their perception, Palo Alto Utilities has accomplished a lot. It really is a market leader, especially in the sustainability, carbon-free type of space, to help show others the way. And then, rather than the either/or, which often comes up with sustainability or efforts around carbon-free, let's show how we can do both. We can accomplish those goals and remain competitive as a utility. I was encouraged to see those, and I think Palo Alto Utilities has been quite successful, at least so far, in that regard. There wasn't a strong awareness of workforce issues common in the community, which is probably maybe not news to everybody here tonight, but those issues of commutes, affordability, access to housing, things like that, those are not uncommon issues in the community and for businesses, perhaps amplified in the government space, local government space, as you know. So those are issues that they were aware of and know that the utility has to address.
So who was at this meeting? Because I'm particularly concerned about point 1, when I think that it's ambitious for us to say that we're a model for other utilities when we're playing catch up. And so I think, so I'd like to know who thinks we're ahead of other utilities?
So I will claim it. I don't have all the names in front of me right now.
I'm just saying generically, who were the kind of people?
They were large key account customers. Stanford was present, DuPont. In the first meeting we had, I think, was it Kaiser? Kaiser was present. We have some former utility commissioners, advisory committee commissioners that were there. Let's see, the VA, and then carbon-free Palo Alto representatives. If I've gotten that, did I get that incorrect?
That's correct, yeah.
So I think we had about, in person this morning, I think we had about 6 or 7. The first time we had about 9, and then we had about another 6 or 7 on the phone each time.
Because, I think that this is one of the kind of things that I always get worried about, is that we're navel gazing. And, we have probably purchased more RECs than any other utility in the country, but that doesn't make us the leaders in the United States or in the world of how to be a utility of the future. And I guess what I want to say is that however we do this going on, that we need to do more in terms of educating ourselves as a group and as a community about what else is out there, because we should be a little more humble, I guess, is the point I'd like to make. Okay. And I think the only way you can think that we're the leading utility is if you don't know what other utilities are doing.
Well, I would certainly agree with that. Yeah, if you don't know what anyone else is doing, you'd certainly say you're a leader. From my standpoint, working across the country, in my experience, I would argue Palo Alto is a leader, the leader, to be determined. I will say I think there will be an opportunity to quantify those things and benchmark those things in a manner that could help put some structure around it going forward in the strategic plan. So as we develop these key priorities and where we're trying to go in the next 10 or 12 years, there will be some metrics that we can measure, and you can benchmark with other utilities, whether they be municipal utilities, investor-owned, all utilities across the United States and the world in regards to perhaps, the carbon-free element of your resources, the amount, measuring the level of sustainability across the triple bottom line by any number of different metrics. So there will be that opportunity that we can develop those key performance indicators, track that over time with the strategic plan, and benchmark to other utilities. So I think there will be an opportunity perhaps to help craft those metrics that will help us maybe look more broadly, if necessary, to see where Palo Alto utilities are performing. So don't know if that makes much sense to you, but I think
Judith means we're not a technology leader in many respects.
so. Specifically technology.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's it's a fair comment.
I mean, policies and things like that. I mean, there just are a lot of things that are happening out there that we are not doing. And it's not that we're a bad utility. It's just not, I think that there is I'll call it a mindset about Palo Alto that we want to believe in our exceptionalism.
Right.
And I think it works against us in something like this if we're not humble and be open to learning from other people who have been there before us.
Sure.
And are, and so there are lots of lessons that have been learned. So I think to the extent that we don't have to fall in the holes that other places fell into is great. I think we have an opportunity because we have integrated resources within one utility, I think allows us to do some really great things. So I think the potential for what we can do is wonderful in terms of leadership, but I think it is premature to think that we are leaders. And so that's why I'm asking who thinks that, because it can only be somebody who isn't aware of what else is happening, or you wouldn't make that statement. And so I guess I'm looking to you as the consultant that has the experience in other places to help support the discussion of how do we better educate ourselves so that we can be a leader and can take advantage of things that have been done. And
Well, I'll again kind of go back to, as I come in as the consultant for the strategic plan and then leave, the strategic plan will leave with the utility and they'll live it. But there will be some tools embedded in there that will help facilitate that going forward, that help the organization and leadership look into the future, look outside California and the United States as to those options.
So there was one, we've talked a lot about technology. Maybe for the process and the feedback, it would be helpful to, are you able to list out some of the areas where you're feeling this is specifically a concern about the perception versus reality in addition to the technology field?
yeah, well, I mean, I think that if you look at, so I'll give sort of a minimal example and a bigger example. So a little example is that one of the things that I think some really exceptional utilities have done is anytime they make a change, okay, they run a report to see who are the exceptions, where does something pop out, so you can be proactive and go to those customers where there's going to be a problem. Okay, so you don't have to wait for the fallout to happen because you're proactive about it. So that's just a good practice thing, okay? I think that one of the things that we do not do for our utility staff is we don't, as far as I can tell, send them to enough other meetings to allow them to participate so they can see what the leading edge groups are doing. And whether we send them or we bring people here or whatever we do, I think is a very important thing in terms of policies like how community outreach is done in ways that are really innovative. There are other examples of communities that have done it much more effectively than what we've done in Palo Alto. And I think we're starting to do some things, which is why I was so interested that we have community outreach for the strategic planning process. Okay. Another thing is how pricing policies are used, how triggers are done to sort of get, and so some of this is enabled by technology. So there are a lot of things that can be done. But like, for example, we have one of the highest concentrations of EVs, but yet I don't feel like we have the most advanced EV program from what I've seen in other places. So those are just a couple of examples. And so some are policy related, some are practice, some are administrative. One of the things you're trying to do is get a new customer information system in place. We're not doing data analytics. So there just are a lot of things that are out there. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to citywide management feedback. In general, so we held one meeting with citywide city department leaders and leadership within the city. I don't know the exact count, I would say probably about 14 folks attended that meeting. We had about an hour and a half, 2-hour meeting with them. But in general, we again provided the strategic direction, general support for that, and similar feedback as to what you gave today as far as the strategic direction. Some of the additional comments they had around the strategic direction itself is, are we missing the heritage of the utility? You know, is that important to convey the long history, the municipal community-owned utility? Is not having utility in there in terms of the statement of problems that people might not know? Personally, I don't think that's too much of an issue. And then actually, finally, does it need to specifically include workforce, which I, again, was encouraged to see the level of awareness externally and internally to the workforce issues. I think that's top of mind, and you'll see that in the next couple slides. But I think in general, the feedback we got from the city was more along the lines of support of the strategic direction, and then we delved into more collaborative opportunities, which we'll see here in a moment. But that process was encouraging as well. I think there's some things that we can build on with the city and some of those collaborative programs that we can use as a model and then repeat that hopefully going forward to address or maybe be more of a leader in more of the processes and opportunities with different technologies being adopted in the community and things like that. So as I mentioned, we performed a SWOT analysis in our last core planning team meeting. These are just some high-level summary results of that process. This process was used to then identify these 4 key priorities, these key challenges that we must address to achieve the strategic direction. So in regards to the strengths and weaknesses, the results of that process, the strengths you can read here for yourself. Well, I'll read them in case the type is too small, but internal knowledge and expertise, really felt that there's a great deal of the staff within Palo Alto Utilities, there's a great deal of smarts that we can leverage in going forward. One of the weaknesses, though, that kind of couples with that is potentially some of the staffing levels. While we have a lot of expertise, we may not have the capacity to implement. So there's a balance to that. Local decision-making, connection to the community. See that actually in some of the customer survey responses and the level of trust in the community of the utility. Leader in sustainability, to your point of how people would view the utility. Rigorous, well-vetted processes and innovative programs, potentially maybe not innovative enough, but as we take a look at those, as we get more in detail and depth, we'll identify opportunities. Some of the weaknesses, missed opportunities with the city, and I think that was somewhat echoed with the city, and we saw that in some of the collaborative opportunities, but maybe more commonly, pretty aware within the utility. Small size, as I mentioned, may inhibit that innovation, just the capacity to get things completed, and staffing levels and vacancies. Any comments on some of the strengths and weaknesses? So opportunities and threats. A smart and engaged community was seen as an opportunity. Obviously, that's well known. There's opportunities with whether it's Stanford or others in the community businesses to partner with them. Ability to learn and partner with other municipal utilities. I think to your comment, what are others doing out there? Can we learn from them instead of stepping those potholes that maybe you might hit if you're the first one out there. Electrification has come up in several as opportunities and maybe even a threat to some degree. What do we do with all the stranded assets potentially on natural gas if we transition everyone to electricity? And building online and e-services, big data. With the I think later this evening there's an AMI update or smart grid and automated metering infrastructure update. Again, that's a major issue in the utility industry right now. Many utilities, about 55%, I think, of the meters in the country are smart meters, quote unquote smart meters. Utilities are just now beginning to kind of scratch the surface. What can we really do with that data rather than just help us bill people and turn people on and off? So we're starting to see the evolution of that information, those programs. The reputation of the utility, and then direct access opportunities, maybe to grow load and access to new customers is seen as an opportunity. that we could pursue. I actually heard that again echoed this morning with the stakeholder group. Threats. Sure. So in California, and Dean may be better prepared to the nuances of the regulatory policy, but there are opportunities to provide at least the commodity and potential service to other customers, and essentially compete for them, and some of those larger customers especially.
Yeah, we heard this morning from one of the former UAC members that I guess there was a study that was done back some time ago that looked at like Moffett Field or some of the housing that may be going on, since it's a federal land issue, that maybe what we do is we look to go to the outside. And I guess there were some studies that were made at that period of time. That was the first that I had heard about it, but he was pretty adamant about that there was opportunities outside, and maybe it's outside the boundaries of the city of Palo Alto. So.
And there are other municipal utilities. We've actually worked with one that has pursued very large industrial type customers or areas, and competed with a PG&E or others to capture those customers. So while it is an opportunity, I think there's a significant amount of probably regulatory processes you need to wade through to make sure that it works. But those opportunities do exist. Threats, federal regulatory uncertainty, that kind of just continues, and that's a broad one across the country. Most utilities are dealing with that, whether it's the Clean Power Plan being tabled, where most utilities really want more certainty around what to do, even developers, people who are building power plants. That's just a kind of a snapshot and a microcosm of the regulatory uncertainty. Attraction, retention of staff, we've touched on that several times. Cyber threats. Competing priorities. This is a common one within organizations, obviously. We've got a number of things going on. They're all high priority. How do we make sense and really get things accomplished? So prioritizing our work, really identifying what's important. Aging infrastructure, which I think was a comment we had received from the UAC as well on our first presentation. Distributed generation. Talked about distributed generation in terms of more what we call demand destruction. So basically loss of load. As load declines over time, or at a minimum flattens or levels out, that makes financing and recovering costs for utilities a little more difficult. So the financial sustainability of the utility with the declining load and distributed generation. It was also talked about in terms more through a lens of opportunities. Can we engage the community and use distributed generation if we can be kind of quote unquote agnostic as a utility perhaps with distributed generation, whatever the technology may be, and we can make it work to benefit both sides. So a threat and an opportunity. And then state legislation regulation, similarly echoing the federal stage there. Sure.
So I just want to point out in the opportunity slide, the electrification. While I'm supportive of electrification of transportation as an opportunity, as the reason that Commissioner Ballantyne and I wrote the colleagues memo about the real-time supply of energy, of electricity, that electrification of buildings for heating and whatever may not make sense for us, and I don't want to allow it to stand here as a given, because I think it's not a benefit to us. And so I guess if there's a way of bifurcating that or talking about it in a way that they are not the same thing. So why
Right.
I'm completely supportive of electrification of transportation as a way to meet sustainability goals. I think part of the problem with people misunderstanding what it means to be net zero, it sort of gets the thing off into the wrong track. And so I'd like us to be a little more clear when we talk about that, so that it doesn't kind of get just lost and buried.
Right.
Thank you.
So I think that, this is going to be a great opportunity to meet with the council on the 10th to talk a little bit more about electrification, because I think that they have a whole different opinion about that whole process. So I think that it would be very important to understand from the council today what that really means to them, and how we move forward with it. It's not going to happen tomorrow. We understand that, but is it decades down the road that, and then you have this strained asset of this gas system, and then what do you do with that portion of it? So again, you know, it's in the forefront of everybody's minds, I think, right now, but there's no forgiving.
But when we're looking at priorities, and so I think you're right that that is the place to bring it up. So to make a priority something that defies the laws of physics just because people want it and emotionally it feels good doesn't make sense to me as the reason that we should make it a priority.
Great.
And so I guess that would be something that you know, of the other things that we can and should get done, I think first, I think it's a really important distinction that we should make.
Right.
May I ask a clarifying question on that? You mentioned electrification of building heating. Was that space heating or water heating or both? And the reason I asked that is that the water heating was something we talked about at a prior meeting, and one of the points to it, one of the things that we talked about was that electric heat pump water heating of a certain efficiency level saves energy regardless of whether it's driven by gas or by a gas plant or by a renewable plant, and that those heat pump water heaters, you can shift that load around.
Okay, but not everybody.
As opposed to the
Yeah.
space heating.
So not everybody can redo their house to have a heat pump, okay? So I think that it's sort of a specific solution that works for some homeowners, and it shouldn't be taken as this is the broad brush, everybody should do it. So it's sort of the...
Okay, I think I'm going to...
I don't want to go into...
Because we've got a lot of meaty things, but that's a point well taken. One of the opportunities that we have in Palo Alto that PG and others don't have is we can also integrate what we're doing here with what goes on in the building department and building codes and transportation systems and the like. And that should be listed in our opportunities. We can look at it at a system-wide level that most utilities can't.
Right. And that was actually brought up by the city, and I think there's some past programs that could be used as a template for expanding that collaboration.
Okay, great.
So moving on to coming out of the SWOT, we identified some of the key issues and challenges the utility will be facing. This is just a very quick smattering of the brainstorm that came out of that process within the core planning team. You can see things kind of group around certain areas, and this led into developing the key priorities, but issues like workforce, financial stability, organizational accountability, collaboration, and communications, technology, and customer engagement. These were all brought up through we had a breakout process of 4 different groups, 4 different teams, developing these, and we had quite a bit of alignment behind these. And then from this process, we then had the groups really work towards it, narrowing it down and identify, the 3 to 5 key priorities that the utility needs to address to achieve the strategic direction. Those 4 areas were workforce, technology, collaboration, and financial. So we took those 4 areas, and they had some statements structured around them to provide a little bit more direction and guidance with each of those priorities. These are the draft, and each time I've introduced these, I've kind of waved my hands. These are very much draft. These are my, our synthesized words, not necessarily codified by the core planning team and the utility as of yet. But we have shown these to the city and to the utility advisory group this morning, or the stakeholder group this morning. But we must attract, foster, and retain a talented and dynamic workforce. With technology, we must optimize technology to enhance customer experience and operations. The key with technology, and I think Commissioner Schwartz mentioned it, it's an enabling mechanism. It's a tool. It's a lever we can pull, but using that internally and externally with customers, and then being more efficient and effective as an organization. Improve performance and engagement. We need to enhance collaboration. There's a strong communication and collaboration element to that, not only collaboration internally and externally with stakeholders, but also communicating. We got that feedback pretty clearly, internally and externally, communicating what the utility does, what we've accomplished as a utility, make the community more aware of the opportunities that exist and the benefit of the utility. And then finally, we must maintain financial performance while investing in our infrastructure, customer services, and resiliency. This last item, the financial item, speaking to more of the maintaining that competitiveness. We do have, infrastructure to maintain. We have to invest in it, make sure that our system is reliable. We keep the lights on and so forth. So kind of the everyday needs of the utility, keep that in mind and that balance with the more aspirational elements that we're focused on within the strategic direction. Any comments or concerns around the priorities as I said as of right now? The next step we will have with the core planning team, we will take these statements in our next meeting on the 20th of this month. They will take these, further refine them, and then start developing the strategies and actions behind them and how we accomplish these things. How do we attract and foster and retain a dynamic workforce? How do we enable our workforce and organization to be more dynamic and react to changes in the marketplace, be more proactive, see the things coming, change services and products as necessary? That's just one example of what we'll be doing. Quickly on the insights from the priorities, the workforce insights, a lot of commonality between the city feedback and the utility. Increasing collaboration and eliminating silos is a key to success. I think within other city departments, they've seen that as a barrier that they've been trying to address and overcome, so we can hopefully learn from them a bit and then collaborate with the utility as well. Specific collaborative opportunities that came up, use those past successes as a template. One of the items that came up, I think, was through the building department and the solar, the PV, rooftop PV permitting process, and how they collaborated to streamline that process for homeowners to get that accomplished. Repeat that success where possible. Align our KPIs as key performance indicators. So those key metrics that really show how well the utility is performing, align those with the city, help improve some of that reporting. And then this is one specific one I found interesting, creating kind of a key account type of a position at the utilities to navigate the city departments. And if you're not familiar with the key account position at the utility, it's kind of a one-stop shop for a large commercial or industrial customer to solve about any problem that they have with the utility, whether it's gas, electric, water, wastewater, what have you. They'll help them navigate all the issues within the utility, solve their problems for them. So it's like I said, one person to navigate that within the city, or somebody at the utility to help facilitate that process. I thought was kind of a good idea and an opportunity. We have some experts that we can go to when we need help. Insights on what plan success may look like. We performed the same exercise this morning as well with the stakeholder group, but just asking them in 2 to 3 years, what headlines would you see? What would you see out in the community that would make you think that the utility is on their way to achieving their strategic direction? Comments included alignment of the sustainability goals between the utility and the city, successful implementation of AMI, automated metering infrastructure technology, developing interdepartmental teams and initiatives, in communicating the city and utility wins. I think that was a big one. We've kind of heard echoed across the different stakeholder groups, communicating what the utilities accomplished, and then creating career development plans for staff and workforce training. I think maybe to your point on learning what else is out there, engaging the broader market.
Could you, so one thing that I would add to the communicating the wins is that we become a really active listening organization, because one of the things that I see is missing in a lot of utility plans is the word listening, okay? And I think our staff actually does do a really good job of trying to listen, but I think having that be brought out in a formal way, that we want to have a listening culture, again, that's one of the things that, to my thinking, the best utilities do that, and they're very conscious that they're doing it. So,
Sure.
The other ones are great.
Okay. So, final slide. Just want to touch on the next steps. Primarily the community workshop on the 4th, but obviously we'll be continuing the feedback we received tonight. We'll be incorporating that in our next core planning team meeting on the 20th, in addition to the other stakeholder group feedback we received. The community workshop is scheduled for the 4th. We did want to discuss the UAC's role in that. I think we've addressed some of the Brown Act concerns as far as how the workshop processes would work. But we kind of had some bookends on the opportunities that different commissioners could play, all the way from maybe facilitating some breakout groups, or listening to some of these smaller groups in their subject matter areas, perhaps around the priority areas, around technology, or some of the workforce financial issues, wherever your area of expertise is at or interests lie. or just be more of an active listener and listening, standing back, seeing what the community has to say, and the consultants and some of the utility staff could facilitate some of the breakout work. I will say the goals of the community workshop are to really, let me see here, if I can get back to our diagram for the strategic plan. We'll introduce the similar elements we talked about today, the strategic direction and the priority statements. That will be the real focus. Our intent is to really kind of encourage the community, give us some ideas around the strategies and actions. They'll all be one or the other, they'll all be mixed together. We'll make sense of them all, but get some feedback and some insights on what the community would like to see as far as, tangibly, what would leveraging technology for operational and customer satisfaction look like? What would that look like to them? What types of programs, what types of services would that look like? My expectation is that we'll get quite a bit of feedback in those strategies and action areas within those priority areas. But we will introduce the entire strategic plan, what the intent is, the role of stakeholders in that process, and get their feedback on some of the plan progress to date. So I just wanted to give you, I guess, that context for, we need some time to introduce, the community to the plan, provide them a foundation for what it is we're trying to accomplish, where we're trying to go, and then solicit some of that feedback more in the more tactical elements and areas. So I guess we wanted to hear from the UAC on if you'd want to, all of the above roles in the workshop, or just sit back and listen more and have us facilitate the groups and facilitate some of the feedback and insights, or maybe each one of you could lead, or a couple of you could lead breakout groups yourself.
Well, personally, I would like to play a listening role. I mean, I think we can learn a lot from the community who are the direct customers and have experiences that many of us don't have in dealing with the utility. So, but if you need us to facilitate, I'm sure I'm sure others would be willing to do that as well.
Okay. Well, yeah, we're obviously more than happy to facilitate, and we will. I think it's more of a what your preference would be, what you know your community, you've lived here, you know much better than I. If you feel the listening role would help facilitate the process and gather that feedback, or if your involvement may inhibit it in any way, shape, or form, or help, those are things I think I'd like to hear. So.
Well, I'm guessing, it's only a guess, you may have gotten some RSVPs, but I'm guessing that the people who will show up are by and large people who are knowledgeable and that
pretty
have
engaged.
had,
Pretty engaged.
They're coming because they have had experience that they want to talk about.
So I'll just reinforce AC. I think that our role is vital for just simply listening. Most people who are showing up here are going to be well aware that we're the ones that advise the council, and they want us to listen to them.
I mean, I guess I would just observe that hopefully a facilitator role also involves lots of listening, so I don't see it as an either or. And I'm happy to participate in whatever way the group decides is useful.
All right, there you have it. And we'll do whatever will facilitate
whatever's
the
necessary.
Biggest flow of ideas and information.
Well, I think the thing is the what Tony and the rest of us were looking for is just, see where, do you want to listen and be involved around all the priorities that we've already talked about, get some ideas about it, because when you facilitate, you're kind of probably going to be in that role of workforce, if that's what you pick. So, so it might be, if that's where you'd like to be.
So you envision splitting this into small groups?
Yeah, so I think the thing is that depending on how many folks come, the idea was that we would probably get breakout corners, and we would break out groups of the community that really are interested in, could be workforce, maybe it's new technology, could be something else too, but we wanted to try to keep it somewhat focused. That's why it was important to understand about some of the priorities that we've kind of established right now at this period of time. Again, they're not in stone and concrete by any stretch of the means, but again, just kind of put some structure around it.
Well, if it goes that way, I'm sure we'll try to split up, so we
Yes.
cover
Right.
everything. And if you
Exactly.
need one or another of us to be the facilitator of this group to make sure, suggestions and comments are noted, questions are asked, and the like, we'll be happy to help.
Okay.
So I want to, concur with Lisa, that I think that you can be a facilitator and draw people out, because there's definitely a value in sitting and listening. There's also a value in having people know you're listening, and sort of the fact that they see it and you can ask follow-up questions and stuff. That's I would love to be able to see the next level plan you have for the day, because I think that one of the things that I've seen in similar situations that I've been involved in is that if you just do it from a blank sheet of paper, you get a very different thing than a result than if you have something there as a straw man or general. So some of the best, like appreciative inquiry methodologies that I've been involved with, that sort of thing, that often you have a panel that discusses sort of a facilitated discussion where you have a panel talking about things that are happening in other places or within the location or whatever, and then that gives the people in the room something to think about as they talk about it, so they're not just talking from a blank sheet of paper.
Starting from zero. I don't know the extent of time we'll have to really provide kind of a primer to help get it going, but we will have prompts, definitely prompts to help. And our initial thoughts were to look at a breakout group around technology, a breakout group around collaboration, communication, and then perhaps consolidate workforce and financial. From a community standpoint, I don't know to what extent an input will be there, but I think the individuals that would facilitate those groups would have prompts and some educational elements to help bring the group with them, to give them some insights and context to help, that next level of those strategies and actions.
Then that all the more reason that I'd love to see your approach, so I could offline comment on the approach, okay? Because there may be some techniques that would be simple to add to it.
No, you want to have to.
Seems that you're missing from that list is the consumer's involvement with the utility, or the consumer experience. I don't know if that's something that will be there. I guess maybe it depend on the interests of the people who show up.
Right, and we actually had a similar comment this morning from the utility stakeholder group. At least the initial response to that, my response to that is around the technology and collaborative elements, those priorities. My bet is that many of those customer-focused or customer-facing programs and services would likely lie in that technology strategies and technologies actions that want to be embedded in that priority. In addition to collaboration, we talked about some of those collaborative opportunities with the community and customers.
All right. So you're thinking technology, IT. I think out of this community, we're going to have a lot of people with technology ideas on power generation, transmission, distributed gen, which is all energy technologies as opposed to IT technologies.
Yeah, no, that all is, and forgive me if I didn't convey that properly, that is the intent of that technology. It's not just an internal to help our processes, it's outward facing, external facing as well with the customers and those different technologies in the market that the utility has to deal with and also customers have options with. So the intent is that those types of things will be embedded in that priority. So does that make sense, hopefully?
Is part of the goal also to hear from the community what their key priorities are?
Yeah, we will be soliciting feedback from the strategic direction and these priorities and see again, similar process. Are there some gaps here? Does this align with what the community thinks and feels the priorities of the utility should be? And are we missing something?
So that my only additional comment would be just to make sure, whatever outline, to make sure there's that generic opportunity for feedback. So if you're breaking up into groups, to not have everything predefined.
No, it won't. And the group type of breakout work would happen towards the end of that community's workshop. So up front, the majority of that will be as a larger group session with a group discussion and feedback with the strategic direction and the priorities. And obviously there's other opportunities. We have other mechanisms for the community to provide feedback. We've continued to give that to like the utility stakeholder group and others if they have other ideas that come up after the fact. Email us, contact us. We'll include that.
And just to follow up on one of Judith's comments, it'd be very helpful to me and I think to others if you are going to break people up into groups, if we know what those groups are ahead of time so we can kind of be thinking about which ones we would want to join. If there are written materials that you're going to hand out, if we could see them ahead of time. I mean, this, for example, was useful, but it would have been more useful to me if I'd seen it a couple of days ago.
Sure.
So I'd had a chance to think about it. So that the more opportunity for us to, have a little background before we go in, I think we will be able to be more useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
It might be a little late in the discussion to give this feedback, but I did want to go back to the draft strategic direction. And I'm just thinking about how Ed Shikata, when he kicked off in the first, when we started discussing the strategic plan, was mentioning that the old strategic plan just wasn't resonating with the staff at CPAU, and he felt the need to come up with something that's sort of like concrete for people to really align behind. And as I look at this, at CPAU, our people empower tomorrow's ambitions while caring for today's needs. I'm just struck by the fact that that could apply to the library or the park, or it's just like it's so broad as to become generic.
Right.
And I worry that I don't know, I mean, obviously I'm sure he's involved and would give you the feedback himself if it applied, but it seems like it's just, I'm having a hard time figuring out what that actually
And so
means.
we will be getting feedback tomorrow directly from 2 different employee groups, and we have obviously solicited internally and externally. What I will say to that is there's a balance you have to strike here, with these overarching statements, vision, mission, strategic direction statements that are longer term and have to encompass quite a bit moving forward. The real key, these are the strategic direction is a kind of a filter for decision making, help guide decisions over the next 10 to 15 years or so. Using in that regard, and then from there we're going to have much more detail that I think will resonate with a lineman, with a water engineer, whoever it may be within the utility, and they'll be able to see their connection to empowering tomorrow's ambitions. So that is to come. I know it's kind of a delicate line to walk, perhaps, of, here's the strategic direction, but we don't have the rest to show you how you're connected. But we are about to develop that. And as that comes through, most, if not all people in the organization should see their connection to the overall strategic direction and each of the priorities.
Well, the priorities make complete sense to me because they're specific in workforce and
Right.
technology and collaboration and financial and infrastructure. These are all I get what that is. Yeah, the strategic direction, well, I've said my piece. I guess I'm also curious, there's 3 sub-bullets. How are they different than the priorities?
Right.
The 3 sub-bullets, again, seem a little hard to figure out, what is that and what does that mean that we do? But I'll just...
No, it's a fair comment. It's an absolutely fair comment. So the aspirational elements of a strategic direction need to be balanced with more tangible elements that somebody can connect with. The intent with the bullets that we probably will refine a little bit are to unpack what is empowering tomorrow's ambitions? What does that really mean? What does that look like? And balancing that with today's needs. We should, I think, provide a little bit more meat to that and direction, and I think the intent is to potentially do that. So that balance between the aspirational elements versus what does this really mean is sometimes a difficult one, but we should remain, at least in my opinion, remain aspirational with the strategic direction to keep people focused in the long term.
A good discussion. We're way behind our stated agenda. Any final comments, or shall we move on to the next agenda item? All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tony.
All right, but
Okay, so for our next topic, we're going to be talking about the Electric Integrated Resource Plan again, and I have Jim Stack, our Senior Resource Planner, here to talk to you about hydroelectric resources and some different portfolio alternatives we're considering for evaluation in the IRP.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm here tonight for the next round of our Electric Integrated Resource Plan discussion. My colleague, Monica Padilla, she got the process kicked off back in June with an introduction to the process. And she was here again last month to talk about California energy markets and Palo Alto's role in them. This slide shows kind of the work plan that we're trying to pursue between now and January 2019. when we need to have our IRP approved and ready to submit to the CEC. This is just a recap of what she has shown earlier, and of course this may be refined as we move forward. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about some of the key policy questions that the IRP is going to focus on and the ones that we're going to discuss tonight. And then we'll be breaking the presentation into 3 big chunks. First, a little overview of our hydro resources, and then a discussion of our carbon neutral plan and our carbon neutral portfolio. And finally, to bring those together, those 2 topics together, some of the portfolio options we might consider in the future, longer term, if we wanted to change the current mix of resources that we have. So here's a list that Monica has shown earlier of the policy questions that we're going to be addressing in the IRP. The highlighted ones are the ones that this presentation tonight touches on, so it's fairly broad. It talks about our Western contract and whether we should renew that, how to manage our hydro supply variability and the market risk that comes from that, how to manage our Calaveras resource, how to integrate the city's Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, or SCAP, with our goals for electrification, and whether we should redefine the definition of carbon neutrality that we're using right now. So to start with part 1, the hydro overview, there are sort of 3 main questions that we're going to be looking at right here in this portion of the IRP. First is how to best manage the supply variability that just comes with having hydro resources. And I actually have a second presentation later on the agenda tonight to focus on this question specifically. The next question is how to best manage the Calaveras project in order to get the most value out of that resource. And the third question, and the one that's the most pressing right now at this point, is the decision we have to make about whether to renew our Western contract for a new 30-year term starting in 2025. So this slide shows a long-term look at our load and supply balance. This is a calendar year basis from 2017 to 2030. And you can see here right away the very large contribution that hydro resources provide to our overall supply mix. In an average year, they supply just over half of our total supply. So it's pretty substantial. This slide also kind of illustrates the question about renewing our Western contract. You can see starting in 2025, if we choose not to renew the contract or renew it at a lower level, we'll have a pretty significant hole to fill in order to maintain carbon neutrality. The next slide shows the hydro resources we have, the 2 major resources, Western and Calaveras, but on a monthly time scale. This is kind of just an average year, so you can see how dramatically the generation profile varies over the course of the year, kind of peaking in the spring and summer months. So this kind of highlights the month-to-month, the intra-year problem of balancing our portfolio with hydro resources in it, even under favorable conditions, like in an average year. So the first resource that I'll speak to is the Calaveras project. This is a resource that's owned and operated by the Northern California Power Agency, of which, of course, we are a member. So we're a partial owner of this resource. We have a 23% roughly share of it. The resource is on the North Fork of the Stanislaus River. It was built in the 1980s. And in an average year, it produces about 14% of our total supply here in Palo Alto. This next graph illustrates how much variability there is from year to year around that 14% figure. In the drought years of 2014 and 2015, the total amount of generation from this resource dropped dramatically. And then this year, we're going to be almost 2 times the average year generation amount in 2017 because it's such a wet year. And of course, since the cost of Calaveras is largely fixed from year to year, it's mostly debt that we owe on the project, the average cost of the project varies quite a bit based on the amount of generation that it produces. So this graph shows a 36-month projection of the average monthly cost of Calaveras. That's the red line, which assumes median precipitation going forward. And that's compared to and the blue line shows the cost of market power. The Calaveras cost line, the red line, is computed by taking the total project cost that we pay each month and dividing that by the total generation that we're expecting to receive from the project. And the generation amounts are shown in the green bars slightly there. And that's why in the winter months, when there's very little generation coming from the project, the cost spikes so high. There are a couple things to note about this graph. First, in addition to producing energy for us, Calaveras produces a couple of other different kinds of value streams that aren't really captured in this cost figure here. It produces ancillary services revenue. It provides capacity, which we can use to satisfy our resource adequacy requirements. It provides load following capability, and it also produces carbon-free generation, which is valuable to us. And the other point to make about this graph is that in about half of the remaining debt that we have in this project will be paid off in 2024, and the rest of the debt will be paid off in 2032. So longer term, the average cost of the resource is going to fall dramatically.
And do you generally have off-takers for when we have excess capacity?
Yeah, we can easily sell surplus generation in the market. The cost of the revenue we get from that will depend on the market price, so that's quite variable. Next is a list of factors which are discussed in more detail in the report. I'm not going to go into each one right now, but these are all issues that could change the value of the project in the future, for better or for worse. One point to make here is that there are really no major pressing decisions that are facing us around Calaveras. We are, of course, trying to optimize the value, and we're tracking all these issues very carefully. We could always choose to, make a big decision like laying off the resource or something like that. But there are no major decisions that we have to make imminently, unlike with Western.
Can I just interrupt on that one point? I mean, what are the options here? I mean, we have a contract, presumably, and we're obligated to take a certain amount of power. Is that right?
Well, we've committed, I guess we have a contract with NCPA to pay for a certain amount of the output of the project. We own a certain portion of the project.
So what are the realistic options in terms of managing the project?
Well, we have a say in how NCPA operates it. How much power they use, in any given month, and how low they drop how much water they use out of the reservoir at any given point in time, how risky they want to be, or how conservative.
Because we're not facing the same issues we are on Western, whether to actually renew a contract.
That's correct. There's always an opportunity to try to lay it off, find somebody else to take over our share of it. But okay. Essentially that's the only major option we have on this one.
Well, you're going to get to the debt, retirement, right?
You mentioned the debt.
One thing also to be aware of is that something like, would you say, 70 to 80% of the cost, of the annual cost of this project is debt service. When that debt service is paid off, I think part of it is paid off, I think, in 2024, and then the remainder in 2032. This becomes a very low-cost carbon-free resource with other ancillary values as well. So that's the balance to the layoff decision.
Okay, the next major resource in our hydro portfolio is Western-based resource. And this, quote-unquote resource is really a collection of reservoirs and generators that are up and down Northern and Central California. The whole system is owned by the federal government. It's operated by the Bureau of Reclamation, and the energy is marketed by Western Area Power Administration, or WAPA. Palo Alto's share of the project under the current 20-year contract is 12.3%, which means we receive 12.3% of whatever energy the project generates. It also means we're obligated to pay 12.3% of whatever the costs are for the project in any given year, regardless of how much energy it produces. In an average year, this resource produces about 40% of our total energy supply here in the city. And as I mentioned, the contract expires in 2024. This next slide is just like the one shown for Calaveras, just indicating how much variability there is around the 40% average year number historically. Again, in the drought years of 2014 and 15, the output dropped to about half of the average level. In 2017, the output will be significantly higher than normal.
Is it slightly less variable than Calaveras because it's more spread out throughout the state?
I'd say that's accurate, yes. One thing to note here is that as part of the contract renewal process and negotiation process with WAPA, we have been pressing them for a while to do an update of their modeling for the long-term generation amounts that are shown here. It was last updated in, I think, 2005, and since that time there have been a lot of new environmental restrictions that have been imposed on the reservoirs and the waterways that we think are negatively impacting the generation amounts. We think the actual long-term average level might be 10 to 15% lower than what is shown right here. The next slide shows Palo Alto's share of the total Western costs. These are starting in 2011, going out to projections for 2030. It's broken into two components. There's the base resource cost, which is essentially what we pay to operate the resource. And then there's the CVPIA, the restoration fund costs, which are sort of environmental mitigation measures that we have to pay under the CVPIA Act. The total cost is converted into an average cost per megawatt hour. That's the blue line, and you can compare that to the average market cost, which are the blue dots. This is just one projection that NCPA put together for us. There's a whole lot of uncertainty around the future cost of Western. There's some uncertainty around the market cost as well, but there's a great deal of uncertainty around Western's total costs. Now there's a lot of text on this slide. It's kind of a laundry list of the issues that threaten to diminish the value of Western in the future. Some of these are minor threats, some of them are major ones. They're all discussed in more detail in the report. But just to hammer home again, the key point here is there's a lot of uncertainty about the future value of Western over the next 30 to 40 years. And I think some of these uncertainties will be kind of figured out or resolved by the time we have to make a firm commitment to renew our contract in 2024. Hopefully many of them will be, but we may still face a lot of uncertainty for a 30-year contract, of course.
Is there any ability in the contracting process itself to protect us against any of these uncertainties?
Let's see, I think I have a slide on some of the opportunities that we are pursuing to do that. Yeah, so in conjunction with NCPA staff, Palo Alto staff is always pursuing different avenues to try to improve the value of Western. Some of the ways we're doing that right now, we're trying to reduce the CVPIA costs, the restoration fund costs that we have to pay. We're right now engaged in a cost allocation study process where they are trying to get the government to reduce the share of the total CVP project cost that power customers have to pay, because there are a lot of different uses for the whole project, and so the total cost is divided by a number of those different uses. We're trying to make sure that the current clean energy bill, SB 100, retains a provision that will allow large hydro resources to count towards the 100% RPS goal. And we're also, of course, actively involved in the negotiations around the new Western contract, the new 30-year contract. And we've already been successful in getting them to add a couple of provisions to the contract that we were looking for. One of those is kind of clear language around our ability to terminate the contract, and so they've added that in there. So we have some ability now to terminate the contract whenever they change the rate or they change the cost allocation in the future.
Jim, can I just leap in here? The State Water Resources Control Board's been trying to figure out what is the natural flow required into the Delta, and obviously the State Water project would have to be responsive to that. My understanding is the feds have got to follow California water rights. Is that true, or can they run the Central Valley project any way they feel like and ignore the state's requirements on natural water supply?
No, I believe you're correct that the feds have to follow the state requirements. That's one of the items here is the Bay Delta unimpaired flow criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could reduce the amount of flexibility we have to manage the reservoirs, to maximize our value.
Good, thanks.
So the official name for the process to negotiate a new 30-year contract is called the 2025 Marketing Plan. And yes, it's actually a 9-year process. It's already well underway. The final plan, which kind of sets up sort of the key terms and provisions in the actual contract, was just published last month in the Federal Register. And over the next 2 to 3 years, staff here will be doing a lot of, we'll be looking to get some direction from the UAC as well as council about the city's appetite for renewing our contract and how much hydro generation we'd like to have in our portfolio. And as part of that, of course, we'll be doing a lot of analysis around the future value and cost of Western to try to inform that direction. In 2020, we'll be bringing the new Western contract to council to execute. However, in 2024, we have kind of a one-time option to get out of the contract if we decide that it's not looking favorable for us. They'll do a cost allocation update at that point, and we have 6 months before the new contract goes into effect. We have the ability to reduce or terminate our allocation. So that's the end of the first part. Are there any questions here about our hydro resources before I shift over to part 2?
Is it, sorry, you might not have this at your fingertips, but I'm curious, you mentioned other benefits like capacity, ancillary services, load following. Is there a way to put a dollar value on those things? Do they have market value? Is it possible to draw up a graph where those value streams are quantified and added so that we can actually sort of appreciate the trade-off between the market rate for regular power and all the other value that the hydro project adds?
Some of them, I think so. Ancillary services, it's kind of hard to project future ancillary services costs and requirements because they're sort of administratively set by the ISO and they change year to year and we don't know what the costs will be. But we can kind of get a ballpark estimate of that. Resource adequacy, we can estimate. Load following is a much more difficult one to quantify. So I don't know, we can do a better, I guess, analysis than what we've shown here, but it's hard to really hone in on it.
In some of them, there's a strategic value to having that metered subsystem benefit that we've talked about in the past with where all of the NCPA members are part of effectively a mini ISO that can provide some savings. It can be difficult to quantify exactly where those savings are and how much of it is attributable to our ability to use Calaveras to follow our load and actually retain that benefit. But there are some things that can be quantified and maybe we can move a little closer.
Okay, so the second part of my presentation, to shift gears, is...
Sorry, I had one question about Western before you leave them.
Sure.
You noted in the report, it notes that Western is dispatchable, but that's different than load following? Or is that?
They're synonymous. It's slightly less flexible in Calaveras. I believe WAPA gives us kind of like a daily range that we can operate within, how much generation we can use, and NCPA schedules it for us, and they can kind of take that range and move it into different periods of the day. So it's dispatchable to some extent, but not as much as Calaveras.
Okay.
So another major area that the IRP is going to look at is the city's carbon neutral plan, specifically First, how the city's SCAP goals, and particularly around electrification of buildings and vehicles, integrate with the carbon neutral plan, and whether any modifications need to be made based on those plans. And second, whether the definition that we have adopted for carbon neutrality needs to be updated. So in 2013, building off of the large share of our supply that comes from carbon-free hydroelectric resources, the city adopted the carbon neutral plan. And the definition of carbon neutrality that we adopted was essentially that we would achieve zero net greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis as measured at Citygate. And we would measure that using the Climate Registry's electric power sector protocol to calculate and report the emissions. We also established in that plan a sort of loading order of resources that we would use to achieve carbon neutrality, with energy efficiency and distributed generation being the highest, the most preferred resources, followed by long-term hydro and renewable resources, and lastly, using RECs sort of as contingency to achieve it in dry years or when we don't have enough renewables under contract. The plan also established a rate impact limit of 0.15 cents per kilowatt hour, and since 2013 we've been able to achieve carbon neutrality every year for far less than that. This is a graph that is a monthly look at our load and total supply by resource type for an average hydro year. You can see that just like hydro, our wind and solar resources are sort of concentrated in the spring and summer months. So what that means is that we make a lot of sales into the market in those months when we're surplus, and we have pretty significant deficit positions in the winter months where we have to make market purchases to fill those holes. And these generation profiles are, of course, why we adopted the annual net carbon neutral definition rather than on a monthly or daily basis. This is a longer-term look at our load and supply. This is a calendar year basis. You can see that with our current portfolio of resources, we're able to achieve carbon neutrality without using RECs, even in a somewhat dry year. And again, this illustrates the big question we have facing our renewal of the Western contract in 2025, because without Western, we have a large hole to fill to maintain carbon neutrality. Next, based on the commitments that we've made to renewable resources over the past dozen years or so, the city's carbon intensity for the electric supply has fallen pretty dramatically from around 350 pounds per megawatt hour in 2005 down all the way to 0 in 2013 if you include the RECs that we purchased as part of that calculation. Or even if you don't include the RECs in 2017, you can see the blue line will get down to 0 as well. And just as a point of reference, a fairly efficient natural gas combined cycle plant will emit around 700 or 800 pounds per megawatt hour, and a coal plant will emit around 1,800 pounds per megawatt hour. So our supply was already fairly clean as a result of our hydro resources, but it's gotten a lot cleaner since we adopted an RPS policy. This next graph was taken directly out of the city's SCAP report. It shows the community's total greenhouse gas emissions by year, and you can see the electric supply contribution to that is in the green bars. So back in 1990, the electric supply consumption contributed about 25% of the city's total emissions, but that's dropped under the carbon neutral plan to 0 in 2013. So going forward, the main contributors to our emissions are, of course, vehicle transportation related emissions and natural gas consumption in buildings, which of course is why there's so much interest in electrification. Any questions on this section before we jump to the last section?
So what would it look like if instead of measuring it based on the annualized basis, we looked at what it really was in terms of what we bought? I mean, I'm just thinking that if we care about this a lot and we're making this and we're choosing to set goals that are more aggressive than the most green state in the country, shouldn't we be using reality in terms of doing it? I mean, you know, I'm assuming that the concern of people is genuine and real, okay? And so would it really be terrible to know what we're really doing instead of what we're, making it, instead of doing it on this aspirational basis? I mean, could the truth be good enough?
Well, in the next section of the presentation, I'll show some portfolios we could pursue in the future, and a couple of them show what it might look like to try to pursue that sort of a goal of, balancing our load and supply and zeroing out our emissions on a daily or monthly basis. So that will be something that we'll take a look at, and I don't have the exact answer tonight, but for illustrative purposes, we'll show that some of the things that we're going to take a look at over the coming months.
It may just be useful to have the data out as on a monthly, daily basis aggregate.
All right. So now I'll try to bring the first two parts of the presentation together. So I want to talk about the decision we have to make in 2024 about renewing our Western contract for a new 30-year term. And if we don't, what we'll have to do to remain carbon neutral. So over the next 12 months, we'll be doing a lot of analysis around the future value and cost of Western, and we'll be comparing those numbers to a variety of other alternative resources that we could replace Western with. So the purpose of the discussion tonight is just to kind of introduce to you some of the different alternative resources that we're going to take a look at and comparing Western to. And we wanted to get your feedback in particular on two main questions here. The first one is, are these the right resources to compare or to consider in comparing Western to alternatives? And the second question is, are the metrics that we're going to show you that we're going to use to evaluate all these alternatives the right metrics to consider when we evaluate them? So if we do choose to reduce our share of Western in 2025 or to not renew the contract, we could choose instead to pursue more long-term PPAs. We could increase our renewable portfolio standard. We could use either variable resources like wind and solar, or baseload resources like geothermal or biomass, which would help us with the balancing question on a monthly basis. We could buy more market power and RECs to go along with that. We could try to go very aggressive on energy efficiency and other distributed energy resources. We could try to procure some more low-cost out-of-state hydro along with transmission rights to get that power down to us. And we could try to balance our load and supply even on a daily basis using something like an option contract on a renewable resource that might be in-state or out-of-state. The next few slides show some, just for illustrative purposes, some different portfolios we could consider for the long term. The first one here, portfolio 1, shows sort of the status quo. This is what it would look like, say in 2025, if we renewed our Western contract. The blue is Western, the red is the Calaveras, green is our long-term solar, wind, and landfill gas PPAs that we already have commitments to. And then the purple is distributed energy resources like efficiency and rooftop solar. And so that's sort of the status quo. The second portfolio is going more aggressive on local resources, distributed energy resources, and reducing our share of Western. The third portfolio is to what would happen if we got out of Western altogether and replaced it with more in-state solar resources or wind resources, whatever happens to be the lowest cost resource at the time. The fourth option is getting out of Western altogether and replacing that with out-of-state renewables, and for example, like Wyoming wind, along with some transmission rights to get that output down to us. The fifth option is similar to portfolio 4, but using out-of-state hydro instead of out-of-state renewables. Portfolio 6 is the market and REC option, which could be the lowest cost option, but it would also introduce a lot of market price risk. Portfolio 7 is a more base load heavy portfolio where we reduce our share of Western and replace it with geothermal or biomass, which would help us kind of balance our load and supply on a better on a more granular level. And the last two options are what it might look like if we tried to do the balancing between load and supply on a daily basis. Both of these retain a pretty significant share of Western, but in the first option, Portfolio 8, we would try to go very aggressive on distributed energy resources, and we would have to, invest in a lot of storage assets and dispatchable load, things that we could use to balance on a daily basis or longer to kind of match our load and supply. And the last option, which I mentioned earlier, would be to try to do some sort of a daily option on renewable resources where we could, sell renewables into the market to somebody when we have a surplus and buy from them in return from a different resource when we're short. So these are just some of our ideas, some illustrative portfolio options that we might consider, and we'll be evaluating all of these over the coming months, and based on that analysis and the metrics that we'll consider, some of these might be what we would recommend to pursue long term.
Jim, that was excellent. Is this a good time to get commissioner comments then, or?
Sure, I have one more slide on the metrics that we'd like to get feedback on first, or as well, but we can get comments on the portfolios too. So lastly, these are the metrics that we're going to be evaluating all these different options on, including the Western contract. So first off, the first criteria is whether the resources will allow us to achieve carbon neutrality. That's kind of the baseline. Everything we are going to consider has to be carbon neutral, we're assuming. But beyond that, the most important metric we'll consider will be the expected cost and the rate impact of each option. And then we'll also be evaluating them based on the uncertainty around that cost and the rate impact, how they affect the diversity of the portfolio in terms of resource type, location, and supplier, and whether they have a favorable or unfavorable impact on local resiliency, reliance on fossil fuels for balancing load and supply, the risk of becoming a stranded asset, and also the ease of the management, our management of the resources under various conditions.
So add to that list maybe sort of the impact of, when prices are going negative at different times of the day, how that affects, when there's just an oversupply of solar, so the prices are, if you look at the ISO map, it's just, all blue and like everything's, all the pricing is negative. What's the impact to our supply when that happens in terms of our financials?
Yeah, that'll certainly be part of the cost analysis that we'll look at.
Thank you, Jim. Very good. Commissioner, comments, questions?
Before you kick off, thanks Jim for an excellent presentation. I just want to recognize all of the work that Senior Resource Planner Monica Padilla put into this as well. She unfortunately couldn't be here to participate in the discussion tonight, but there was a lot of work and effort that went into preparing this for your discussion.
I'm going to make a silly comment. I'm listening to a 30-hour professor's tape on complexity. Yours is a good example of it.
Yes, it is.
Well, my comment in trying to look at these various portfolios, it's really hard to look at them without understanding the cost impact. I mean, I know that's one of your important factors, and you give some indications here of what resources are more expensive and less expensive, but without seeing some numbers, it's really difficult for me to say, well, I would look at this portfolio more favorably than another one. That being said, the portfolio 7 with the baseload renewables, what are the downsides to increasing the baseload renewables? Are they particularly expensive? Is that what are the issues there? Because just without knowing what the costs are, that seemed attractive to me as an alternative.
Yeah. Right now, cost is the main issue with baseload resources. They are quite a bit more expensive than solar or wind right now, roughly a factor of 2 different, I'd say. That could change in the future. There's been talk from year to year of legislative requirements that we obtain a certain amount of our RPS quota from baseload resources. Some of the baseload.
Which we do, right? We do use some baseload resources.
We do, yeah. Sometimes the carve-out is more specifically written towards geothermal. It's being pushed by certain stakeholders in that community. So that could shield us from that, but cost is kind of the main factor that weighs on that one.
I was afraid that was the answer.
Yep.
And geothermal has its own variability, right? A lot of geothermal plants are operating way below rated capacity.
That's true, yeah. Geothermal also produces greenhouse gas emissions, too. That's another factor against it.
And I just thought, this is a lot of work, so it's really helpful, thank you. On the key metrics, what I didn't really see here is the thinking about flexibility and control, so that if we're in a 30-year contract, we have a lot less flexibility than if we're in a 15-year, or if the agreement allows an out or a range of purchases.
Sorry, say that last part again?
So just to add as a factor, the flexibility and control, so that we are not 100% at the mercy of an operator or something, but we have some ability to control our own destiny.
Okay.
A lot of questions. One would be, what's the cost of having, or the opportunity offset cost of having excess supply, long-term projections, so we're talking 35 years out from now. Long-term price trends, it would be great to see charts on that, long-term price trends, projections for transmission, for photovoltaics, particularly for storage. I think in the next few years, and Judith and certainly your husband know more about this, the next few years we may start seeing we have more information from the market of what's happening with storage costs and storage technologies, and by 2024 that data will be available to us. We'll have much more visibility on that. Long-term demand requirements, you've mentioned stranded assets a couple times, or the distributed generation, is that a threat or is an opportunity for us, and how does that fit into how much we build into our resource base on that? I think also when you talk about risks and the like, but I'm so conscious of the weather risks, not just on resource availability, do we have dry years or whatnot, but do we have extremely wet years because we're going to have a warmer Pacific? Do we have more high winds? Do we have risk of damage to the PV installations? I don't know, but I want to, earthquake risks and the like, think about those kinds of things as to the robustness and reliability of those resources. And so it's good to get the model portfolios as a way of thinking about it, but I think, and this is AC's comment as well, seeing that underlying cost projection data, and by the way, when you gather that, I'm sure there's bands of uncertainty. You can show us those as well. Here's the upper and lower limits of what people are seeing. That would help quite a bit. But I guess partly, is this the things disaggregate more and more, distributed generation and the like. What does the utility look like then? Are electrons free? Whatever. Maybe we think about things differently. There are utilities in Europe that tell me we plan for a time when electrons are free. We just want to be in distribution. We don't want to be in generation. I don't know.
That's what nuclear was supposed to do. You weren't going to need a meter. It's because there were going to be so much electricity.
Yeah.
So it sort of ends up, the markets don't end up actually being that. And I just want to, in terms of as we press the staff to give us numbers for things, there are some things that it's just, you know, if we ask for precision without accuracy, we haven't necessarily gotten good numbers. So I just want to make sure that we are cautious in that we understand that if we're asking for projections, these aren't necessarily things that are precise and accurate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Projection bands might be, yeah.
I think it's a good point. I mean, and there are both quantifiable uncertainties and then strategic uncertainties, and I think you've talked about both of them. I think it's also helpful when you talk about the utility business model to add some distinctions about where we're going to discuss these different topics as well. I think it's worth remembering we have the distributed energy resources plan going in parallel with this, and so there will be a lot of discussion of the distributed resources aspect in that plan, and a lot of the analysis from that plan will feed into the IRP projections. When it comes to what businesses we should be in, distribution and generation, or otherwise, that discussion I think is going to be very focused in the strategic plan discussion, and also there will be some interplay between this IRP and the strategic plan and the DER plan for that topic too.
A lot for those of us up here to absorb, I'm sure. It does seem that this idea that you have the ability to cut back or get out entirely 4 years after signing the contract is a wonderful thing. So you would minimum aim high when you sign the contract and gathering data in the next few years after that. Okay, great. Welcome, Councilmember Filson. This is the local solar. Let's try to I presume that the UAC members have read through the materials that have been sent in advance, and we can go through the pages with that in mind in the presentation.
Are you recommending that we move quickly on this topic?
Allow time for discussion, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Resource Planner Sonika Chowdhury, who is going to present on community and local solar, and also recognize a number of other staff who've been, we have another number of other staff who've been heavily involved in these surveys and this analysis of local solar.
Good evening, commissioners and council members. So I'll make it a quick presentation since it was already published. And want to recognize my colleague Lisa Benintar here. She helped me extensively with the survey. So back in June, we had detailed nuts and bolts proposal around the community solar program. So today's presentation is kind of stepping back and looking into our past and present, how our solar programs has evolved over the times, and as well as giving you a snapshot of customer interest based on our survey results. So in Palo Alto, close to 20 years now, we've been supporting local solar. Started with few demonstration projects.
We can skip this slide.
Okay. So with that, that's how currently how programs look. We are moving away from the state mandated programs to more innovative, cost-effective local solar programs. So we have NEM successor program, coming close to our NEM program cap, so we'll have NEM successor program. So instead of getting full retail compensation, it would be the export component. Group buy is the same program as SunShares, which we've been successfully doing it for 3 years now. Community solar and solar donation are like still under the formulation. Also acting as a role of providing trusted information. So based on the customer interest, there is lots of information out there from solar developers. So utility can play a key role there, and based on our staff resources, customer representatives, as well as online tools like PV rebates. And we just launched our new our new solar webpage to guide customers around the permitting processes and all. So given that how our programs have evolved from the past to today, quickly trying to capture on prices across these solar programs. So on the left-hand side is one bar graph representing value of local solar, which is close to 8.5 cents, the value of having energy and capacity, as well as avoiding the transmission charges and any T&D losses. And on the right-hand side is kind of these, under the CLEAN program, which is a feed-in tariff program, up to 3 megawatts, we are paying 16.5 cents. And once that 3 megawatt cap is reached, we'll move them close to 8.5 cents of compensation.
Do you explain this better for me? Is this a cost chart or a price chart? Is it our cost of obtaining electricity? What are we comparing here?
For CLEAN program, that is there. For net energy metering is what we pay to the customers, the retail rates. And for the community solar is not there yet, but what we could potentially pay if there is a new project, if it comes online.
So that's kind of presuming, this presumes a 4-cent subsidy, is that it?
So 14 cents is like an estimate of what it'll take to construct a carport solar project in Palo Alto. And if we are able to get some better, somehow negotiate a better price, it could be as low as 10 cents.
Well, so is that 14 cents, is that all in with the extra staff time that were presented earlier this year and the cost of setting up the program?
That would be an additional 1 cent. This is the cost of energy, solar resource in Palo Alto, yeah.
Okay, I guess where I'm going is that I don't feel that we've ever seen a really clear chart of what the cost of the community solar is, apples to apples, compared to our other sources of electricity. And that's probably a baseline in order to compare how much subsidy do we want to give to that and compare. So I understand in your left-hand column here, if we were buying it through one of our RFPs, we'd be paying 8 cents or something like that, transmission plus the 5 cents. So that would be a cost we'd have to have in any case. But I don't feel comfortable we've been given a complete all-in cost on the community solar.
So majority of the cost is the cost of the solar component itself. That's the majority of the cost. The program administration cost is, let's say, 1 cent on top of this bar graph. And that program administration cost is for all of our programs, including our net energy metering and CLEAN projects. So we absorb them in our functioning of the group. So we can call it out separately, but that would be depreciated over 20-25 years, the program admin cost.
Another way of presenting this is that the cost of doing the utility scale solar in Central Valley would be roughly 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and the cost to us of obtaining the solar power would be 14 or 15 cents a kilowatt hour from this. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That 14 or 15 on the high end, I mean, the only way to make that program successful will be to bring that cost down through a variety of strategies that we talked about a little bit when we presented the community solar project a while back. Things like prepayment or other sorts of contractual strategies to bring that price down.
We're never going to do it because it's the cheapest. We're going to do it because there are other reasons we're going to want to do it. And it's never going to win the battle that it's the cheapest way to produce electricity.
I think just something else I would add when we're talking about this chart, if you could bring that back up real quick. is I think it's important to note who pays in these different scenarios. So the idea behind community solar is that the community solar customers pay the differential between that 8 cent and whatever we get to with the community solar program. With net metering, it's a state law. Effectively, all ratepayers pay.
Let me jump ahead to the survey results. Survey people weren't asked, would you pay a 6 cent per kilowatt hour premium to get local solar? They're asked to pay a 5% premium, not a 80% premium. So it gets back to the question of how much of a subsidy do we have? And Judith's right, there are other values, but we need to understand and quantify things carefully.
So I would just be real clear up front. The community solar program is not intended to have any subsidies associated with it. And so if it is a 6 cent adder, we're not doing the program. We can't do the program. Nobody will pay for it. If we can get the price down so that it's a 2 cent adder, and we're able to find enough people who are willing to pay 10% over, then we may have a successful program. The trick with the administrative costs is there is a startup cost that you sometimes have to deal with. We dealt with it with Palo Alto Green. For the first few years, Palo Alto Green cost more to administer than we recovered in revenue. But over the life of the program, all of those startup costs were originally paid back. So I think the long-term viability and expandability of the program is also an important part of the entire discussion. The last thing that I'd add in is that there's you can look at things on a cents per kilowatt hour scale, and you can also look at it on a total dollar scale. The total dollars, the potential risk associated with the community solar program on a total dollar level for taking that first step is $25,000 to $50,000 per year. So 10, 12 cents sounds like a lot. If nobody signs up, everybody drops out, you're talking $25,000 to $50,000 a year. So then the question is, from a community value standpoint, do you value community solar and want to take that risk at the risk of $25,000 to $50,000 impact per year, or not? And that's a policy decision for the UAC and council, of course.
Thanks. Please continue.
So moving on next, so this is a quick, so almost a month and a half ago, we launched a survey, and mostly to our residential customers. So we have close to 26,000 residential customers, 15,000 single family, and 11,000 multifamily, which means apartments, townhomes, and condos. And the research question we started with was very narrowly focused based on our earlier discussion in June. Is there any enough interest in our community solar program given our carbon neutral portfolio? And the survey, how we designed, was in 4 sections. So getting some basic demographics information, and then gradually getting into interest in utility programs, local solar, and community solar. And this was like a one-time email blast, which we sent out to 2 groups. So we have one list of 13,000 customers, and these are mostly self-selected who raised their hands, came to our community workshops and other programs, and we want to be informed of new programs, reach out to us. And on one-time basis, we also like 1,700 randomly selected people, which are mostly rental population, because our 13,000 primarily represents single-family homes. So since this program supports people who don't have access to good roof locations, like people living in apartment townhomes, we sent this to this separate email blast as well. And this was an overall like one-time email blast, and fairly good response from these outreach. So this represents, so the blue color is our single-family homeowners who responded, majority as we expected, because they were the self-subscribed, and some response from apartment dwellers as well as folks living in townhome and condos. We can skip over the slide.
I just want to ask one thing. So why do you think you got such a big spike in Midtown?
Maybe need to ask a Midtown resident.
I mean, seriously, do you think it's that there's just a lot of people talking to each other and that's what's doing it?
Russian hacking.
No. I mean, I have friends who live in Midtown who have solar, so and I know they talk to each other, but.
I'm a Midtown resident. I mean, I would say there's
Lisa,
less shading.
you need to come up and introduce yourself.
Sorry. Hi, Lisa Benatar. I actually work for the City of Palo Alto Utilities, and I'm also a resident of Midtown. I mean, just off the top of my head, I would venture to guess that there's less shading in Midtown. I used to live in on Lytton in North Palo Alto. Almost every house has just so much shading on the roofs. Sometimes the roofs are steeper. I mean, it might be as simple as that.
Thank you, Lisa. So, in terms of the interest in utility programs, so most of the survey respondents are already participating in our energy efficiency, water efficiency, and reduce waste programs. And there is a significant interest both in solar PV and electric vehicles.
So if I understand this right, you did 2 surveys. One was of people who had already expressed interest in these kinds of programs, and the other was a random based on multi-unit ownership. So there isn't a true random sample here, right? You have 2 skewed samples, is what we're talking about, right? Do I understand that right? One is people who are already prone to be interested in this, and the other is multifamily, which is not likely it's a secondary target anyway, right?
But the second category is like our interest group, the rental population. We want to gauge their interest in program like community solar, given that they don't have option to install their own solar. But yeah, we did not looked all our 26,000 customers and randomly pick.
Right. So you don't have a normal sample here. You have 2 skewed ones. Okay.
It's not, except the apartments, the renters who live in apartments aren't skewed in that sense, but they don't have roofs that they control.
Right.
So they're targets for community solar.
Okay. The other, I think, key thing to understand is what our study question was for this survey. I mean,
and the research question was interest in such kind of a program given our carbon neutral portfolio. We were not truly looking for like 100% of the population. And
so as you try to gauge demand, you're going to have to factor in those systemic slants.
I think the key thing we're aiming for is there adequate interest to sustain a program? And I think even
I understand, but your sample selection, I'm sort of trying to wrap my head around. You know, how do you make the best use of that?
So I'd like to abbreviate the review of the slides here, since we've all seen them. What number of households would you need to sign up to make the program viable?
so for the first project, the 0.5 megawatt project, it's close to 100 to 200 customers. And even at the full scale of the program, we are not talking more than 1,000 customers to be part.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was like few of our results was surprisingly high number of.
All right. Would you forward to the one slide that says 73% of respondents are willing to pay a premium?
14.
Keep going.
This one?
Yeah, there we go. So if I read this right, 76 respondents out of that were willing to pay a premium of 20%.
Or more.
Or more, okay.
Yeah.
But we went back to that other price slide, that cost slide we were looking at. the best case estimate for community solar was going to be $10 a kilowatt hour versus $8 otherwise. So that would be
cents
cents a kilowatt hour,
yeah.
right? That would be 25% differential. But I'm still having trouble matching up between what it cost us to provide and what we charge customers.
Can we actually back up on that? That's
Yeah.
actually not a 25% differential, because all you're seeing there on the 8 cents, that's the wholesale cost.
Okay.
So a 20% differential on the wholesale is actually more like a 10% or maybe even less on the retail.
Yeah, so if you could help us understand that, because this is the key point. Will people sign up for community solar and pay a premium, and how much? Match all this up between the wholesale costs and the retail price, and what this slide is about. Is this in a meaningful percentage things, or should you be
Yeah.
asking it at a higher level?
If you want to really boil it down, 10% is the threshold if we can bring the cost for the community solar projects down to the minimum we possibly can. So it's a very difficult hurdle to get over, but not impossible.
Right, because that was sort of my take, was very similar to Michael's over here, was, yeah, it's great that almost 3/4 of respondents are willing to pay a premium, but the demand curve for that falls very, very steeply as the price goes up. And so in order to actually have anything, you got to get the price down close to where the avoided cost is.
So a lot of community solar projects are financed by third-party developers and not by the utilities. And where the problem comes is that when you're talking about doing community solar for low-income neighborhoods, the developers don't want to take on the risk because it's questionable whether they'll get paid back. For a third-party developer to come in and say, I'm going to do it in Palo Alto, I bet you'll find people who will take the risk. So it's not that the city would have to take the risk and pay for we'd have to allow the third party to come in and be the development financer.
So I want other people to chime in on this, but I'll ask one more question and try to shut up for a while. So the question you're really pondering is whether to spend $50,000 up front to see if you can design a project that comes in low enough to take the next step of seeing if people will subscribe for it. And there won't be a subsidy per se, just we'll be selling some electricity that costs us more to generate than other electricity.
Other electricity that we would actually have, yes.
Okay.
Sell subscriptions.
Right.
And the upfront cost of gathering that information it's some staff time, but it's not $150,000 of staff time. It's, we have a lot of experience doing RFPs. Well, and that's if we find out that we can actually hit $10, and then we go and start the program. But just to find out whether we can hit $10, that's actually that takes some staff time, but it's not $50,000 worth of staff time.
Right. I was going to say that's the key is that starting off on doing just having staff take a look at it, we won't even come close to what Jonathan was talking about is that it's the staff time and then the startup of the program actually starting and putting out an RFP out on the street and doing it that way. So that could be the cost, but we're not talking about that here. Just staff time.
So just to clarify, when you said that $25,000 to $50,000, that's if the project gets built and nobody subscribes? That would be the annual cost to the city, to the CPAU?
Yeah, that would be, like the value of that project versus for example, if we end up paying 11 cents versus the value is 8.5, the differential there is $25,000 to $50,000 a year, which no one is paying for that. So we'll absorb that in our portfolio cost, which are close to $80 million a year, our electric procurement cost.
But you would get subscribers before you built the project, right?
So that was the proposal we had was we'll issue the RFP, get a real price marker, and advertise that. And unless we have a required minimum subscription, we won't go ahead and construct the project.
if I could just also point, one other helpful number might be that you need about 200 subscribers to fully subscribe that one community solar project. There are 250 people willing to pay 10% or more, or sorry, 300 plus people up there just within the 5% sample willing to pay 10% or more. Whether they would actually sign a contract is another question, but it's a helpful indicator.
And the other thing that is also possible in how these things get structured is that, so if you look at the Elks project, okay, the Elks paid for it and paid the development to do that. Somebody else might have an interest that we could help encourage them or simplify the requirements or what has to happen for that a partial subscription could be done so that there could be an on-site user for electricity as well as, and then there's the excess of what they need could be a subscription program. So there's more than one way to look at it that minimizes the exposure to the city.
I'll just make a couple last comments. Frankly, I felt the survey was written in a way to reach the conclusion that somebody wanted in advance. You could have posited, for example, questions that say community solar costs 25 to 50% more than the solar we get from the Central Valley. Do you support community solar? And you might have gotten a different kind of response about favorability and the like. So this irked me a little bit on that. But I'm not closing my mind on this. I just think we need a clear accounting of costs of this, and then a clear statement of what the benefits are for people. And something we've talked about a few times, but there's shading, so forth, but there hasn't, it's not resilience to the grid. We've complained that. So, but I think that would be something we ought to see in advance of the joint study session with the council. And
so what we can do then is that we can go back and take a hard look at what some of the true numbers would look like, and then come back with another report that will actually show some cost. And then we can maybe come up with an estimate of what it might look like for what that cost might be just for staff time, just to take a harder look at this.
And I think being specific about use case scenarios, so if you're saying, if we put it on a city building and we configured it in such a way that in an emergency situation, we could use it for resiliency, but the rest of the time we're going to use it for community solar, what would that look like? If there's an apartment complex that's willing to do it. So I think rather than having it be just abstract costs about numbers, I think if you actually looked at it in the context of specific applications, I think that will be more helpful for our group to look at it.
And so prior to me joining CPAU, we done extensive review of the potential sites for community solar, and the golf course parking lot identified as one of the top sites. But we can review that list again and see if any more centrally located locations and city.
To build it, to plan to build it, I'm saying for the people in this group to understand what it means. So you don't actually have to have like a corporation site lined up willing to do it. Just say, if you had a corporation, here's how it could work, that kind of thing.
Question, since we're talking about resiliency. Have you looked at, or is there a number, a gauge of sort of, how much resiliency is important, right? That is, if we have 1 kilowatt of resiliency, it's not any resiliency. On the other hand, 500 megawatts is way more than we need, okay, if a grid goes down. Have you folks ever sort of come to an assessment of, we think this is sort of the target amount we would need in order to sort of keep basic services going and stuff like that? Is there any assessment like that?
Yes. Years ago, we did that assessment. And it was in the context of whether we should build a gas plant in Palo Alto and whether that would be feasible. So we looked at different sizes of gas plants, what they would cost, where we could site them. Obviously, siting is really the killer there. along with the emissions. And I don't remember the numbers right off the top of my head. It wasn't you didn't have to reach the full, there were a lot of different ways to configure it. You could connect to critical sites. Locating it near the treatment plant was a possibility. And so you could give it different sizes. You didn't have to get the full 190, 200 megawatts of generation. You need to be at least 50, 60, 70 megawatts. Yeah, we didn't look below 50.
So I think, again, clear accounting policy and of benefits.
And of benefits, so we give fair consideration to the subby would be great. I appreciate that.
One other comment, if I may, or kind of a question. I mean, back on the survey design, I noticed that, I guess there aren't page numbers, but there were questions around what are your main reasons for supporting solar energy? Mm-hmm. And I didn't see a slide saying how people had responded. And I think this is interesting because it's been a subject of debate here in the UAC whether solar energy, installation of local solar energy is the right way to express our desire for sustainability. And to Commissioner Danaher's point, it's a bit skewed. You only have 4 reasons to support it, and not doesn't bring in other ways in which people might express preferences to be green and sustainable and lower greenhouse gas emissions or whatever their other priorities are. It's not stacked up relative to other alternatives. Anyway, but I guess my question is, do you have data about how people responded to that question?
It is there, and unfortunately, I think it's missing from the appendix slide, so we can email it to you afterwards. But top of my mind, there were like 4 or 5 reasons which we gave to select from why local solar. And the top one was energy independence one, as well as promoting more renewables in my locality. I think those are the...
That's a different question. That's interesting, but that's a different one than I was pointing at.
Which one were you looking at? Which question?
11. There are 2 numbers. There are 2 questions numbered 11.
Oh, the why community solar? Yeah. So we have a response for question 11. So it followed the response to question 10, and so yeah. So that was like why interested in. So this slide represents the response to question number 10. Why you are interested in community solar?
Sorry, in our report, there's question 10, then 11, and then 11, and then 11. Yeah. I'm referring to the third number 11.
So that 11 was for question number 10. If you selected first, second, or third, then you'll see 11A, 11B, or 11C. So if you selected, I already have PV and I want to keep supporting more community solar, then only you'll see the 11C. Yeah, that was.
So then I guess my question is, for 11 A, B, and C, are the results summarized anywhere?
So at a high level, most of the apartment and condo and homeowners selected 11A. Yeah, we have those results. We can share it with you afterwards. Yeah.
I'll just say on the survey design, the possibility of skewing people's answers was very much in the forefront of our minds, and if the survey still appears skewed, then we may not have achieved our goals. I'll just say that.
Not a big problem. Thank you so much for this and for putting up with our questions with such good grace. I appreciate that. Shall we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, we can. The one thing I was also wondering about is whether the respondents really understood the difference between community solar and how much they understand what the portfolio already looks like in Palo Alto, and if there's a way to ferret out any of that.
So we had like 2 introductions. One was introduced our portfolio is 100% carbon neutral, 30% is large solar. So we introduced that language before asking people to rank their opinion about local solar. And before asking to rank like how much you are interested in community solar, we had a brief overview of what community solar is at a high level, at a public site, and providing 100% of your electricity. So, but again, like since we don't have much of those details, what this program means, we like a high level overview. Okay, thank you.
We'll go on to agenda topic number 8, update on smart grid projects.
So we came to the UAC maybe 3 months ago and kind of rolled out the smart grid pilot. And we came away with, there were some questions about what were some of the benefits that we learned from the pilot that we have. And so tonight we're going to give up a little bit more of an update on that, what some of the things that we learned, and then also where we are today with that. So Jonathan, you want to introduce?
So I'd like to introduce Shiva Swaminathan, a Senior Resource Planner, who I know you've met before, and we also have a number of other staff who have been helping on this project. I think Eric Wong is sitting in the audience, and a number of other admin staff, Dave Yuen, and a number of others who have been helping with these projects. Shiva?
Okay, I have a number of slides. You have the report. I'm going to try to zip through it and then open it up for questions. So back in 2012, we did an assessment of the feasibility of providing AMI systems for the city. We found the capital cost to be about $15 million, and we looked at a net present value over 20 years and found it to be not cost effective, as you see in that slide. And as a result, the council authorized a number of pilot projects to pursue in the meantime and try to flush out some of these benefits. And the 8 pilot project, which you see in the report, is listed there. The first one is a Customer Connect pilot, and there are a number of customers who are interested in AMI meters. So we asked them, whoever is willing to or interested in these meters, to sign up for it, and we provided 300 meters to the interested customers spread throughout town. The cost was about $450,000 over a 5-year period. What you see here in blue is all the customers who signed up around town, and through an electric mesh network, we were able to provide electric, gas, and water meters for these customers who signed up. We provided them a portal to view their usage, water, electric, and gas. The water leakage was one of the key features they were benefited from. In terms of lessons learned, if I may just read it out loud here. The mesh network, we had early estimated the communication network to cost quite a bit. As part of the initial assessment, it was lower than we anticipated. We also found the meters, life of the meters, we had initially assumed to be 20 years, and it's likely to be lower. And that we needed third-party, when we do mass rollout, we'll need third-party installers to install the meters. There were a few customers who expressed concerns regarding exposure, radio frequency exposure. We educated them, but some of them had lingering concerns, and we'll have to find ways of satisfying their concerns.
I think the only way is to let them opt out.
Yes.
It's I think when people get to that point, no amount of scientific reasoning can work. It's just kind of let them opt out and don't force them to have it.
Yeah.
Surcharge. That's been learned.
Yep.
Yeah.
There is quite a bit of interest in time of use rates, particularly among our electric vehicle customers. And interestingly, all these customers requested these portals, but only 70% of those participated ended up actually looking at the portal, even though most of them requested it themselves. This is
Can you go back to the one that the no detectable changes? So are you saying there was no detectable change in their overall use, or they didn't shift their use?
There was some shift of use for TOU customers.
Okay.
But looking at the data, hey, I'm more aware, hey, what am I doing? I'm going to reduce my overall use. No.
Okay, so I just want to point out that, first of all, now what was the window? The peak rate window was how many hours?
Summertime between 12 and 6.
Okay, so I think that, okay, the fact that the incentive with the time of use rate is to get them to shift load.
Right.
So, and it's not necessarily to have a conservation effect.
Correct.
And then, so that's kind of reasonable. And then I think the 6-hour window is too wide to have as much of an effect as some of the more narrow windows have.
Yeah, I probably misspoke a little bit. So for you asked for the peak. For customers to shift, we have off-peak, which is from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. They get a 2-penny discount for the whole house if they charge during that time. So that's the incentive we're trying to provide. If you charge your electric vehicle after 10 p.m., there's a 2-penny discount.
Right, but I guess my point is that if you're trying to get people to shift when they use their washers, dryers, dishwashers, that kind of thing,
Right.
I think the study design was not necessarily optimized for that. If all you were trying to do was to get EV owners to shift their charging their EV overnight, again, and then you get into is 2 cents enough?
Yes.
Okay, so, and I say this now as, when I tried to sign up for the study and couldn't get in because I didn't have an EV at the time. And now that I have an EV, I got to tell you, for 2 cents, it wouldn't get me to change it either. So I think that, there's a number of factors. So I just don't want us to draw too many conclusions from that. Okay.
We're probably not drawing conclusions yet. Well, let's
But we can acknowledge a couple of things. I mean, first, that there's been a lot of work done on time of use rates and what's effective and what's more effective and what's less effective. That I think in the last few years that we can build on. Number one, and number two, that there has been some shift in the actual time periods for time of use rates, and we have to look at that rate design again. There's a Prop 26 element to it too, in that the rates have to match the cost to serve customers, and so incentive rates aren't necessarily something we can do. So that's something just to bear in the back of your mind as we talk about time of use rates.
Okay, thanks, John. These were some of the tools provided for customers who were on time of use rate. This is a bill presentment of how they saw this in this particular bill, which shows up. The customer saved, I think it's $2 for that particular month. So this is kind of a high-level summary. The different customers, the TOU customers of the 117, their bill impact had a wide range. The average monthly benefit was $1. So 2 pennies, $1, the average impact. At a high level, there was interest. So people who, even though we said, hey, it's only a couple of pennies, they said, well, I want to be on it. Because they're doing the right thing for the overall community as well. There are currently we opened it up for a brief period, but now we don't, but we have 350 customers on wait list. Let's see, the average usage is about 180 kWh higher for EV customers. That's about 600, 700 miles of EV traveling per month. Yeah, so customers without EVs did not benefit. This is a slide of the takeaways from the other pilots. I won't get into that. It's already in your report. I just want to briefly touch upon this going forward. This is a schematic to say where are we with AMI, what are the different projects we have. At the very top, CIS is our customer information system, the billing system, which, ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning software tool for the city as a whole, is being in the process of being evaluated for replacement. And that project is going forward. That's what you see at the top in yellow. Along with that, in the mid is this customer information systems. We are in the process of upgrading that system as well. And the AMI and MDM, the meter data management system, will have to coordinate with that implementation of the CIS system. So as this, on the long term, we are hoping by end of next year, we would have made a determination of which vendor we're going to go with in terms of for AMI, but not implement the actual system, the complete system, until a couple of years later. But in the interim, we could roll out these meters for interested customers and get them started earlier. So that's kind of the overall plan for the next 5 years. With that, we are in the process. You've heard a presentation from us on the, we have retained a consultant to come and look at these projects and recommend a timeline for implementation, and it'll be coordinated with the utility strategic planning effort.
So one of the things I think would be useful for the UAC and possibly the City Council is there are some really good publications that have looked at how these things have been rolled out in other places and what are some of the lessons learned. And so DOE has a Voices of Experience series that they're doing. And so the first one looked at sort of customer engagement for that. There's another one that was a technical one that they just finished, and they're about to start work on a one that looks at what are the benefits of AMI and what are sort of the things that have actually been proven and demonstrated. And so when that working group starts, I think it would be fabulous if somebody from the Palo Alto utility team could be part of that. Because I think there's a lot that's known now that you didn't know in 2012. And so there's a large body of work that can help in there. And there have even been some utilities that have done what you're talking about, which we refer to as an opt-in smart meter program. So I think we could talk offline about that, because those are a little weird, and I actually worked on one of those. So in any case, I think there's good material that we can have that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So
I know also too is that staff has gone around. We've contacted other utilities similar to us as moving forward, where they've actually launched, understanding a little bit more about what some of their issues have been as they launched out to some of their customer bases. We're also working with NCPA that looking at possibly maybe getting the members together to work with and some outside vendor portions to look at some saving costs, so that it would be more of a joint cost savings, because there are some of the NCPA members that are just too small that just can't afford it. The rollouts are way, way too much for them. And there's some cities that have just said, we're just not going to do this. This is just, we don't see the benefits for how many customers that we have. When you talk about places like Healdsburg, Briggs, places like that, they're not. But when you look at places like Santa Clara or Roseville or places like that, they're about in the same spot that we are. So some of the large utility portions that belong to the NCPA, we're all about in the same piece, and that's why we're thinking that there might make some sense to join forces and look at some costings with some of the vendors, and there'll be some advantages of how we go about rolling these things out. So we're looking at that at the same time.
That's terrific. Very supportive of that.
Any other comments on this agenda topic? So Dean advised me earlier that if it got too late, we could postpone this next item on the hydroelectric variability management strategy to another time. Shiva, thank you again. So what is your timing, and when do you need UAC action on this?
We actually have until December if we want to move this, because again, not next month since we've got the community, but we could move to December if that would help.
December gives us plenty of time.
Yep.
Okay. Would commission members prefer to skip that one for tonight? I think it's going to be a very interesting topic to learn about the resource variability and the like. So let's do it when we have fresher minds on that. Excellent. That brings us to agenda item 6, which is topics for discussion at future UAC meetings. The next one we talked about will be on the 4th. It's just this work group for everybody. But then on the 10th is the joint session with the council. So really like it if people would give me comments, by the end of the month on topics, things that might be surfaced with the council on that. We'll move agenda item 5 to the November, December at your discretion, staff's discretion.
For potential topics, so can we in November maybe have a discussion of what happened at the joint study session? Can we talk about it?
Sure.
Thank you.
Debrief on that. Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
And it looks like on the schedule that in December, we'll be talking about, come back to the strategic plan and presumably get the consultants' take on what they heard at the workshop.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that what will end up is that, we'll probably do a brief overview in the November as well.
Okay.
That we can talk a little bit about what happened on the 4th. Also, too, is that I'll make sure that I talk to Tony and the other consultants to make sure that you get some information before the 4th on kind of the strategy aspect of what the rollout might look like for that meeting.
All right. Any other comments, topics? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So
I'll second.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, approved.